Yes, Helvetica type is what I like. Helvetica is the neutral Swiss font. The Swiss are, of course, a long, free people, though they have a good dose of socialism in their cantons. They are Swiss people, and they are they're the host of Geneva and Lac Léman, where fighting parties go to have their meetings in grand buildings overlooking fine boulevards, facing fountains and the lake. They go there to make peace, and the Swiss are a neutral people. And Helvetica font is one without shoes, right? I say not so much shoes, but they don't have blades on that font. When you have Roman type or Times type, you have the little shoes on letters that have extenders, like the capital A at the bottom. You'll find those little shoes. Those are not shoes. Those are actually blades, very sharp razor blades. And government always uses fonts with serifs because they want you to know that the words that they issue in their codes, in their federal CFRs or codes of federal regulations and the like, that these are compulsory, and we will cut you if you disobey us. That's the threat. So government words tend to have threat in them. Whereas the voluntary sort of Christian angled theorizing that we do here on the David Tullis Show is in Helvetic, because there's no threat. It's all voluntary. We do not compel people to do things. We just encourage people, maybe like you, my listener, to do certain good and right things. One of them might involve a local office of a national charity, and that is Teen Challenge. Teen Challenge deals with people who are held in the sway or the grip of a life-altering, often physical or physiological claim upon them, drugs or alcohol. Some have clearly spiritual addictions, such as pornography, and they often find their way to a bed and a stay at the Teen Challenge Center at the foot of Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga. And Dr. David McNabb is the overseer of the local branch of Teen Challenge. David, tell my listener a little bit about how some people are just caught up in addictions. How do they find out about you? And when you have the first meeting at an intake gathering or meeting, what do you find out? What are they dressed like? What are they saying?
David, is as varied as the people themselves. We have individuals who are coming from they're coming from the justice system. They're coming from the courts at times. Sometimes they're coming directly from jail. In many cases, they're coming with parents. I know it's been probably several months ago. We had a young lady came in. She came in with literally 3 generations of her family. She had her mother with her, her daughter, and her grandchild with her. And she had been caught in the struggle with meth for years. And so she was coming down here to get free. And so we have, there is you cannot stereotype it. The addiction is no respecter of persons whatsoever. And that's been the realization I've come to learn. Been Teen Challenge now for a year.
And so we have what's called the opioid crisis. What is that crisis doing to these people when they come seeking a place at Teen Challenge for a stay? How has the opioid crisis seized them? What tell more about that?
I could do that. Can I give you an example? I've got a good friend of mine who is he's in his early 30s. He was a graduate of a local private school, one of our excellent private schools here in Chattanooga. He graduated with a full scholarship to a major university, played sports, and had everything in his life was laid out in front of him. But he got to his first year of college, and he had some things that took place in first year that could have happened to any of us, David. He had the parents that started to went through a divorce. He had the loss of a grandmother. He had the breakup with a young lady who he had hoped to spend the rest of his life with. And all of those things are absolutely total expected life occurrences. It happens to any of us, could happen to any of us. But with him, with all those things happening at one time, it put him into a tailspin. And so he came back to Chattanooga to visit one of his friends. And one of his friends that evening could see how down he was. And he said, would you like to just not hurt for one night? He says, man, yeah, I really would. And so his friend, who had issues with some health issues, of some legitimate health issues in his past, he gave my friend a one Percocet, and it cost him 10 years of his life, because in that one Percocet, he found a way to escape from that depression, the heaviness of what he was dealing with. My friend had no issues all through high school, not one drug, not one issue with alcohol. But with that one occurrence, he had that situation that altered his life for literally 10 years. And so he came to be with us. And so as he came in and he began to understand that, that what had taken place in his life as he was looking around was happening. He was not, he was not out of the ordinary. I mean, he came to Teen Challenge and he found individuals just like him. These addicts are not hardened criminals. These are individuals who may have had some kind of a health issue someplace in their life. They had one issue with depression. They got one prescription medication. And then what they found out is when they got caught into the prescription medications, those things are expensive. And what I found from one of my other friends who unfortunately is an expert in heroin use, he informed me that we've got, you can get a heroin, you can get all this other kind of stuff at only a fraction of the cost with virtually the same effect that you would have with opioids. And so when you hear this thing about the opioid crisis, I know for the last year, we've heard this new term in the news called fake news, where we make issues where there are no issues. Well, I can say authoritatively that whatever the media has given you regarding an opioid crisis, it is here, it is local, and is doing damage unlike anything that we probably have seen in years, since probably the 60s or 70s with the outbreak of the hallucinogenics and all those kind of things. It is here, and it is available to absolutely anyone and everyone.
And people are turning to these salves and balms to soothe themselves because they're not finding that comfort in another source, perhaps.
David, that's one of the big lessons that I've learned since coming to Teen Challenge, because I work with experts. Okay, these are folks who have worked with they've dealt with these addictions their entire life, and they say 9 times out of 10, an addiction begins because you're trying to escape reality. Something in their life. As I mentioned a while ago, it could be something physiological. It could be an injury. It could be a car accident. It could be an abuse that happened as a child, as a teenager, as an adolescent. It could be any of these things. And so when you hear someone being an addict or an alcoholic, I have come to learn, take off the judgment gloves. Put down the gavel. These could be our sons, could be our daughters, it could be our parents.
We're talking with David McNabb of Teen Challenge. Now, David, my caller can call if you want to. It's 800-8949, 800-8949. If you have a question, maybe you, my caller or my listener, have knowledge of someone who desperately needs some kind of assistance, kind of moral encouragement, or maybe a place where his context or her context changes. And there are vacancies. Are there not vacancies?
There are vacancies, absolutely.
Vacancies at Teen Challenge. There's capacity of 65 people to stay there. Now, what you do is you stay there, and we can hear a little bit more about the benefits to your acquaintance, my listener's acquaintance who needs to make a connection today at Teen Challenge. But before we take your call, David, there's a fundraiser coming up at Teen Challenge. Say something about that. We want the listener to maybe participate and enjoy a great meal.
It is, and I appreciate the way you led me into that, because it is a fundraiser, but more so than that, it is our primary way of bringing our ministry to the local community. We're celebrating 40 years of ministry in the Chattanooga area this year, and every year we have our spring banquet, our annual spring banquet, like almost every other local charity does here in Chattanooga. But this year, because it's 40 years, the banquet is paid for. If anyone is out there and you would say, well, I would like to participate, but I just, I don't know if I don't have a lot of money. Hey, can I tell you, the event is paid for, your meal is paid for. But if you are here and you're wanting to find maybe possibly a local charity you'd like to support, that's awesome. But the bigger thing is that if you have a need in your family, if you've got someone that is struggling and they don't know they're struggling, or they don't think there's hope, this is an event that you can come be a part of. Watch, listen to the testimonies, listen to what's happened over 40 years, watch and get a chance to meet our students, and they will tell you that hope is possible.
Well, we say hope. Now, is this hope in self-will? What is it that the hope? What is the object of this hope? What is the source of this hope, David McNabb?
David, the hope is the ability to get out of bed in the morning, put one foot in front of the other, and know that there is. Let me go ahead. It's Good Friday. There is a God who loves you. There is a God who has a possibility of having a greater life than you've ever known. And at Teen Challenge, what we do is we put you in our environment for 1 year, in our bubble, in our protective bubble, and we cause you, as the scripture says, to be still. Just be still. Get away from all the things that are plaguing you. Get away from all those things that are pulling against you, all those things that have caused you, that have driven you to drugs to begin with. Just get with us, be quiet, let's take care of you, and focus on the fact that you're loved.
Well, let me ask him how that works. If someone's there at Teen Challenge for a year, how does that person make a living? How does that person pay rent? What about food? What about calling? What about family members who may not be a good influence? Or what about family members who are a good influence? How does that person maintain these connections?
Okay. You come into our facility, and we are just because rehabs are expensive, okay, especially secular rehabs. Teen Challenge, it basically costs us $3,000 a month to take care of one of our students, okay? We charge $300 a month, and that $300 includes your stay on our campus night and day, 24 hours a day. It takes care of basically you have an opportunity to meet with your family, to have access to your family after a certain period. There's an intake period where we just cut you off from all those influences, good and bad, to kind of get you acclimated to our environment. And then after that, you have the ability to
Isn't that a little severe?
It can be. It can be. But the issue is, David, one of the things we tell parents, there is no greater assistance that a young person has than a loving family. But we would also say there is no greater hindrance to their healing sometimes than a loving family, because there is a line that has to be drawn between loving and enabling. And for a parent, that is very, very difficult. So it sounds severe. We know it's severe, but the long run, you get it back.
Well, what if you have someone who comes in who has an addiction problem, David McNabb of Teen Challenge, and who has heard the gospel all of her life? Let's say she's rejected Christianity, is just peopled by hypocrites and big talkers, people who don't know their Bibles or who do and who are just bad examples. How do you win someone over to the gospel who has a very hardened but Christian background?
I'm uniquely qualified to answer that question. Coming from 25 years of local church ministry, I can tell you, David, in many cases, it is easier to take someone off the street who has never heard the name Jesus than to have to go in and basically reprogram and reintroduce them to a God of grace, a God of love. They know the situation they're in. They know they're living a life that is putting their family through hell. They know that. So what we have to do is let them know that God knows that, and he loves them anyway. So we have to, in many cases, we have to reestablish their understanding of the God of the Scripture, that he does intend for them to have a life that is supernatural, that they can turn their back on all the stuff that's brought them down this path, and they can have a life that can be full. But they have to come to embrace a God who is the God that perhaps they've never met.
Well, I have a friend, let's say, who's 45 years old, working man. He's jobless. He's been Union Gospel Mission some. He's been homeless, living at the Blue encampment off of East 11th Street, and he hears about Teen Challenge. He comes to you, but then on the other hand, in the same day, you, David McNabb, meet a teenage girl who's 17, senior in high school, who's addicted to alcohol, and her parents have very long and drawn faces when they come with her to meet with you and your intake official. How do those two categories of people live in the same campus? How does that work?
Well, the one thing, the one logistical thing is our guys and girls, it is in a co-ed situation. It is in a co-ed surrounding, but they're basically kept, male and female are kept apart. Okay. They're the housing and so forth. They have classes together, they have eat together, they have chapels together, but that part of it is separated. Now, when it comes to the socioeconomic mixing of that, they've got one thing that binds them together, and that is the hopelessness that they've dealt with. The fact that they have one thing in common. It doesn't matter if they've got a Rolls in their father and their parents' driveway, or they haven't got a house they can go home to. They've got one thing in common, and they have one need in common.
This is David Toulis, and we're talking with David McNabb of Teen Challenge, describing a little bit of the life that as many as 65 people, if there's a full census, 100% census at Teen Challenge, the life they lead there in the shadows of Lookout Mountain next to Chattanooga Christian. And David's telling us that the cost is about $3,000 a month to have someone stay there, but the charge is a nominal $300 charge. So there's a lot of grace, I guess, by donors, by companies, by businesses that are supporters of Teen Challenge, the local chapter.
And we do not turn anyone away.
And no one is turned away. So here you have an activity in the realm of Christendom, which is restorative. It's voluntarily funded. There's not the use of tax money. Whenever you have the first dollar of tax money coming in, you're suddenly bound by alien rules and regulations as to what you can and can't do and say, but not in your case.
Not in our case, no.
So that makes it very unusual, and there's probably a great deal of liberty within the Christian framework of the founders and the operators of Teen Challenge to have the best presentation of the gospel and the best claims for being for the residents being lawful, being caring for others. And let me ask you this, David McNabb. It seems that many homeless people are very self-absorbed. They are constantly thinking about themselves. They will ask for money, but not offer to do you some service to obtain the money, like you sweeping the sidewalk in front of your shop. We've been hearing about the panhandling story, and one business owner said, "Well, they want a hand, but they won't give a hand," and so they're sort of self-centered and self-seeking. Is part of the work at Teen Challenge to help the patient, if you will, the client, to turn his orientation away from his own needs to caring about and helping some other person.
Absolutely. And students is how we refer to them. But one of the primary issues that we face, and most of our students have told me this, they said, "David, I am the most self-centered individual that you will find anywhere." They said that's one personality trait that binds all addicts together, is we are by nature self-absorbed. We will throw anyone under the bus to get what it is that we need. And so that's one of the very basic things that we have to look at, is the fact that, listen, there's a God who loved you enough to give his very best for you. What are you doing?
Well, how do you take that description of what God, who God is, how do you take that to make it useful to that person to change the orientation? How does that work?
It's the very basics, David. We literally have to go back and if you've ever talked to a group of individuals who from say the first grade to high school, okay, you're trying to cover all of these folks at one big blast of information. This is exactly what we're having to do. We're having to take the gospel. We're trying to take the very essence of what it is that changes lives. We have to take this and make it where it's understandable to someone who has never opened the Bible once to even understand what Christianity is. Christianity, by its nature, is a religion of giving, and I hate it. It just makes me kind of queasy when I use the word religion, but it is a movement.
I know.
It is a faith of giving. And that's one of the first things that when someone comes into our facility and they begin to have to live there, and they live in a communal setting here, if you will, for the first time. Let's take your example from a homeless person who may be in a tent by themselves, out next to the highway. Okay, you're going into a room and you're living with 4 other guys. Okay, by just logistics, you are going to learn to share. You are going to learn to be considerate of those around you, because you're there on a voluntary basis. You can walk away, but it's funny. Our guys have a tendency to police themselves. We have counselors that are under 24-hour care, 24-hour counsel, but at the same time, they do a good job of keeping each other accountable.
The number is 800-8949, 800-8949. If you have a question for David McNabb of Teen Challenge, do give us a call here in the next minute. This is David Chulis. Now, what is the budget of Teen Challenge, and can you just break down a little bit of where the donations and gifts come from that run your operation?
We have about it's about $1 million. I think it's about $1.75 million, 1.7 million budget a year. Most of that budget comes from we do have some foundations that have been very kind in assisting us over the years. We have to resubmit for grants. That's an ongoing process with us, but primarily it's getting a chance to network with individuals. We have a lot of faithful donors, individual private donors that have been with us for years. And I know you hear this with most nonprofits, no gift is too small. But I sign lots of letters. I sign thank you letters every single week, and it doesn't matter how large or how small. We appreciate everything that's come in.
So that's what you, my listener, need to think about if you want to invest in local economy and free markets. Invest in an organization such as Teen Challenge, the Chattanooga chapter, and online is tcmidsouth.org. That's tcmidsouth.org. And also, David McNabb, that's the URL for my listener if he wants to sign in to come to the banquet just a few days out. And that is, it's a free banquet, but why should he sign in there?
That lets us know that they're going to be there. We have reserve seating. There will be the opportunity if somebody wants to walk in, you can, but it allows us to make good preparations. We usually run somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 folks a year. It's one of the larger banquets in Chattanooga, and we'd love to become just to be educated educate yourself as what we're doing to deal with this local issue.
This is David Toulis, and we're arguing for local economy and the free market. And here, again, this is what we're talking about in the way of you might say reparations. And this organization does not have a particular interest in the question of the divide among the races, but it is still where you, my listener, the man who matters, can say, I want to affect good in Chattanooga. And in fact, you can come to the event. What is the date again?
It's April 10th. April 10th, we have at the Trade Center, we have a silent auction in the social hour at 6 o'clock, and then the dinner itself begins at 7. And David, if I can follow up, you made a statement there that was huge. If there is any place in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where there are no lines drawn between socioeconomic, racial, educational, whatever those boundaries, we are a melting pot at Teen Challenge. We have those who are well educated with degrees. We've got folks that don't even have a GED, and they come here because of one reason. Somewhere along the line, they've bought into the lie, they bought into the deception that life is not worth living in a sober fashion.
David Toulis here. I think that one of the problems we have living in Chattanooga and Southeast Tennessee is that we've alienated ourselves from many things that we once had and that we could have. They're kind of in front of us by way of God's promise, by way of, I would say, the marketplace, the means. Mm-hmm. Free market is in many ways what God gives as the means to achieve prosperity and service to others. It's through the liberty, through the freedom of the free market. And that would be the accrual of capital, the building of businesses, starting of companies, all of which, of course, exist not just to bring money to yourself. That's not why a business exists. It exists so you can serve your customer. You can serve other people. Capitalism, free enterprise are about the customer. They're about the other people. And I know we hear Tim Cook saying from Apple that, well, our user is not our product. For them, maybe it is, but the general principle is true that in business and in capitalism, you're there to help the other with what you do in your business, whether you're machining parts or providing a service or making sandwiches. It is there to make someone satisfied that he had an interaction with you. And so Teen Challenge and groups like it, right, in the free market sector, in the charitable sector, in the nonprofit sector, David McNabb are there to you might say to oil and to smooth this whole operation and to bring people who were a drain on the system, a drain on Chattanooga,
exactly,
a drain on the county, to bring them, to turn them around from being drawing out from the sustenance from, but putting sustenance into by finally ending their drug and alcohol addictions.
Well, I would be curious to know of the listeners that we have now. I wonder how many of those, are at least responsible for taking care of businesses, of taking care of human resources and so forth. How many employees have you lost because of drug addiction, because inability to be sober enough to come to work? What we're learning about local businesses that support us is that we put people back into the workforce that are appreciative of that, being able to take care of themselves, being able to support themselves.
And hopefully with a little gospel encouragement, they are now thinking how they can do that the same for others, looking out for other people, the less advantaged people, maybe the person of the other race who has a bad past racially or in his family. David McNabb of Teen Challenge, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, again, the website, make note of this. It's tcmidsouth.org, tcmidsouth.org. The gala, the big event, big society event now, but there is a deep Christian charitable purpose behind it, is April 10. That's April 10, and go to tcmidsouth.org. Sign in and go to dinner. You'll meet new people. Great for networking, but also think of the larger goals here, restoring local economy, restoring free market, and doing it individually, man by man, woman by woman, team by team. David Toulis and Teen Challenge.
Chattanooga Morning News with Russ and Val, weekdays from 6 to 9 a.m. on Nooga Radio.